Course Plus. Expressway to elegant career.
Get real. At this point, a lot of people are going to have a nasty wake-up call. Previously, I talked about identifying your life's objective. This is a very exhilarating process because, as I've mentioned previously, it's too easy to live your life like a lost person. You think you have a purpose. You think you are trying hard. You are being a mature and responsible adult. But it turns out that despite how hard you try and how much you plan and how seemingly focused you are, you end up going around in circles. This, of course, is due to the fact that you don't really have a grand objective. Previously, you zeroed in on the grand objective of your life. You zeroed in on what you want your life to produce. Think of it this way. When people show up at your funeral and they see your body in a box, what would you want people to think about the life you lived? Would you like them to say that he or she was a kind person, or he or she helped a lot of people, or he or she revolutionized the world or discovered something? Think about those things. This should form your grand objective because you're using other people's impressions of you as some sort of an objective mirror for what you think you want for yourself. Now, if that seems clear enough, here's a monkey wrench. You have to ask yourself, are my grand objectives really mine? I know this seems kind of a bit of a letdown because, after all, previously, we talked about the great revelation of your life's meaning or central focus. However, we can't do this blindly. We can't just say, because I do have this grand objective, then that's all I need to focus on. Well, there's another level of analysis. You have to ask yourself, is it really mine, or did I just pick it up from somebody else? This is not an easy process to go through. It actually requires some preliminary steps. Do a memory detox. A lot of people think they have grand objectives because they have certain memories of the past that lead to these objectives. Maybe you remember telling your mom that when you grow up, you'll be an attorney, a doctor, or a politician. Maybe you told your dad that when you become a grown-up, you'll be a professional athlete. These are heartwarming when people say them now, but are they based on the truth? Do a memory detox. In other words, when you say your grand objective to yourself, think of past memories that this triggers. Zero in on one memory and ask yourself, did this really happen? Now, if the answer is yes, you're going to analyze it some more. But if the answer is no, then you need to start having second thoughts about your grand objective. This might be an assumed memory. You don't want to build a house on a foundation of sand. Now, assuming that memory is actually based on facts and things did happen, ask yourself, am I exaggerating things? You have to remember that people say stuff all the time, but what we choose to remember might actually be quite different from what actually took place. Ask yourself, do I remember this correctly, or is this exaggerated? Am I blowing things out of proportion? Again, if this is the case, then you need to be suspicious of your grand objective. It might be based on fiction or exaggeration. Neither of these is good. If it isn't exaggerated, ask yourself if there are missing pieces of the memory. If this is the case, then be very suspicious. You might be filling in the memories to produce a certain mental state that you are looking for. This usually happens in cases of abuse. Whether mental or physical, they kind of work the same. It was so traumatic that you only remember in fragments. You have to detoxify your memory. Finally, if your memory is based on fact, ask yourself, is this the only interpretation? Are there any other grand objectives I can derive from this memory? Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you are not entitled to your personal grand objective. I'm not trying to rob you of your big dreams. However, all I'm doing is walking you through the process of realizing what your grand objectives rest on. Are they real memories, or are you exaggerating them? Are you filling stuff in, or are you just interpreting them to lead to a certain outcome? Just be aware of how this plays out, so you end up totally owning your life's grand objectives. You start seeing it with your plain eyes. You don't choose to filter it with rose-colored glasses. Do an attitude detox. Memory is one thing. Attitude is another. Believe it or not, your attitude plays a big role in how your life turns out. If your attitude is that of a victim, then you find yourself feeling small, stuck, powerless. Worse yet, you feel that you are life's martyr. Everybody takes turns victimizing you. You feel disrespected, and deep down you don't really feel worthy of respect. The worst part of all this is you feel like some sort of victim. It's too easy to excuse yourself to be really harsh or even cruel to other people. After all, if you're hurting so badly, it's too easy to get numb to the pain so that you lose sight of the pain you, yourself, dish out. Try to explain your attitude to yourself. Given what's happening in your life, are there any other ways to interpret what's going on? For example, if you think your job is a daily humiliation where you clock in, spend 8 hours, and then clock out, ask yourself, Is this the only way to look at this situation? My job does give me a paycheck. I do hang around with interesting people. I do get to use my muscles or my brain for work. Obviously, it's interesting enough, otherwise I would have quit a long time ago. Ask yourself, is the way I'm looking at this part of my life the most optimal one? This is really an indirect way of asking yourself, what is my attitude? The problem with attitude is sometimes they're like sunglasses that we put on and we forget that we have them on. Everywhere you turn seems like everything is a little dark. But it turns out things look that way because you have your mindset sunglasses on. Your attitude works the same way. You might think that you're just perceiving your reality or living your life and everything is objectively neutral. No, they're not. Everything you perceive from the outside world is filtered through the prism or lens of your attitude. Believe it or not, if you change your attitude, the world's appearance and your perception of your world starts to change. You can either look at the end of the tunnel as the beginning of freedom, or you could look at that light at the end of the tunnel as a train headed your way. These are two totally different things, courtesy of differences in attitude. I need you to do an attitude detox. I want you to take off your lens or filter and look at what's going on in your life in the most objective way possible. Is it really that bad? Are your relationships really that poisonous? Is your childhood really that messed up? Oftentimes, the limitations that we feel hold us back and drag us down are actually chosen. They're not chosen by other people, mind you. You chose them. You wear those invisible shackles by choice. Reclaim your power to choose. You have to understand that your life is a choice. I hate to break it to you. The way you dress, even your IQ, how much money you have in the bank, how good you look, the style of your hair, the size of your car, the size of your house, whether you rent or own a house, and all the other details of your life, all those are choices. A lot of people would have a problem with this. After all, who in their right mind would choose to be poor, oppressed, or burdened? Who in their right mind would choose to live a life of powerlessness and limited choices? Well, these are illusions. Ultimately, your external life, I'm talking about things that people can readily observe, is a product of your internal choices. If you start choosing internal realities differently, sooner or later they will bubble up to the surface. It's not going to happen overnight, but these changes are undeniable as long as they're consistent. As long as your mind has totally shifted direction, sooner or later your thoughts will be manifest in the reality you live. You start dressing differently. You start talking about different things. You start expressing a different kind of attitude. Sooner or later you start behaving differently. As I keep saying throughout all my trainings, the world doesn't care about your feelings. It really doesn't care at all about your emotions. The world doesn't care that you have certain emotional issues and that's why you're 50 pounds overweight. All the world sees is that you have extra weight. The world doesn't know nor care that you are scared of certain things and that's why you have the job that you have and it pays very little. All it sees is a person making very little money. That's why it's really important to reclaim your power to choose because ultimately, if you want your life to change and produce certain outcomes, these will all flow from your internal choices. This is why it's really important to make those internal choices. There are only really 3 questions that you need to wrap your mind around. What are your ideals? What are your values? Does everything line up? Only you can answer these questions. Everybody is different. Some people are content with the few bucks and food on the table. Other people want to travel. They want to learn all they can learn. They want to experience the very best that life has to offer. Others like challenges. They like adventure. They like to discover new worlds. Again, everybody is different. But what's important is that you are mindful of what you want for yourself. What's important is that you have a clear idea of what your purpose is. Unfortunately, when you think that you have a grand objective, chances are you picked this up somewhere. It's not unusual for children to live the lives of their parents. It's not unusual for children to inherit the conflicts and frustrated ambitions of their parents. I'm telling you, life is too short for that. You shouldn't live your life for your parents. You should live your life for yourself. They had their chance. Let that go. Focus on what makes sense to you. This is your purpose. You have all these deadlines and big projects that need to be completed. Unfortunately, the more you complete them, the thicker the fog. Eventually, it starts to dawn on you that what you're doing is pointless. It doesn't matter how mission critical a project is. It doesn't matter how much money you will make with the project. You still end up in the same place. When you live with purpose, all this fog clears up and you see that straight line to where you'd like to go. Similarly, purpose flows from integrity. Integrity is one word you don't hear much nowadays. Usually when people use the word integrity, they often talk about the ability to tell the truth. They talk about living life with character. Well, that's important in everything. I use the word integrity in a very limited sense. When you live with integrity, you focus like a laser on the outcomes you would like for your life and you act accordingly. Everything you do leads to that outcome. That is a life of integrity because your actions line up with your ideals, your values, and your grand objectives. Believe it or not, living life with integrity and prizing integrity leads to a real life. You feel like your actions have consequences. You feel that every moment that you waste chasing your tail has a consequence, and just like having some sort of personal GPS, you keep getting redirected to where you need to go. Each step that you take has more meaning. It's not just something that you do as part of the course. You don't feel like you're just going through the motions. In fact, if you become so disciplined, every breath you take feels like an opportunity and a blessing at the same time. That's the power of a life of integrity, flowing from purpose.